For 2 years, I thought I was losing my mind, but that is exactly what she wanted me to believe. I ran into the night with nothing but the clothes on my back, carrying a secret that could destroy a billionaire's empire, or finally save my soul. My name is Clara. When a fire took everything I had left, I was forced to return to the gilded cage I had barely escaped, my ex-husband's secure penthouse. Only this time, I wasn't alone. I brought our son. Walking back into his world meant facing the man who broke my heart and the woman who meticulously orchestrated my downfall. But I am no longer the frightened girl they chased away. I am a mother protecting her child, and this time, the truth is coming with me. The lesson. True strength is not about enduring quietly. It is about having the courage to trust your own reality when others try to blind you. If you believe in the power of second chances and standing up to toxic control, please like this video, share your own thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of resilience.
The rain beat against the floor to ceiling glass. Vance pushed open the heavy oak door of his bedroom. He reached for the brass lamp on the nightstand. The bulb clicked on, throwing warm yellow light across the room. He froze. The breath caught in his throat. There was a woman in his bed. She was soaking wet, her dark hair plastered to her pale cheeks. It was Clara, his ex-wife. She was shivering violently under his silk sheets. But she was not alone. Clara clutched a small, sleeping infant to her chest. The baby wore a faded yellow blanket. The soft rise and fall of the child's breathing was the only sound in the room. Clara looked up. Her eyes were hollow, rimmed with dark circles. She pulled the blanket tighter around the tiny body. "He is yours," she whispered. The words hung in the air. Vance felt the floor drop beneath him. 2 years. He had not seen her in 2 years. She had vanished into the night, leaving behind nothing but signed papers. Now she was here, in his secure penthouse, looking like she had survived a war. "Clara," Vance said. His voice was rough. He stepped closer. She flinched. The movement was small but sharp. Vance stopped immediately. He looked at the baby. The tiny face was peaceful. The child had a head of dark hair, exactly like his own. The reality hit him like a physical blow. He had a son. "How did you get in?" Vance asked. He kept his voice low. "I remembered the service code," Claire replied. Her teeth chattered. "The one by the kitchen freight elevator. I did not know where else to go. My apartment building caught fire tonight." Vance shifted instantly into his natural state. Logic, control, fixing the problem. He pulled his phone from his pocket. "I am calling my private doctor," Vance said. "I am locking down the building. No one gets up here without my direct approval. You are freezing. I will get you a warm robe." Clara watched him pace. He was making calls, barking orders. He demanded a pediatrician. He demanded 24-hour security. He ordered his assistant to buy every baby supply imaginable. It was overwhelming. The luxury of his power was sweeping over her like a tidal wave. It looked like a dream. Any other woman would feel safe. But Clara felt a familiar, creeping chill that had nothing to do with the rain. "I am not safe," she thought. "He is building a very beautiful cage. And I just walked right into it." The doctor arrived within 20 minutes. He checked the baby. He checked Clara. The baby was perfectly healthy. Clara was exhausted and slightly malnourished. Vance stood in the corner of the room the entire time. His arms were crossed over his chest. His jaw was tight. "They need rest," the doctor said. "Uninterrupted rest." Vance nodded. He escorted the doctor out. The heavy door clicked shut. The penthouse fell silent again. The silence stretched. The clock on the wall ticked. Tick, tock, tick. Clara lay back against the pillows. The silk felt foreign against her bruised skin. She heard Vance's heavy footsteps, returning down the hallway. Panic spiked in her chest. She could not do this right now. She could not explain the unexpected pregnancy. She could not explain why she ran away when there was a baby on the way. Clara closed her eyes. She slowed her breathing. She pretended to be asleep. Vance walked into the room. He stood at the edge of the bed. Clara could smell his expensive cologne, cedar and black pepper. He did not speak. He just stood there, watching them for a long time. Finally, he pulled a thick blanket from the closet and draped it over the edge of the bed. "I will not let anything hurt you," Vance whispered to the sleeping baby. "Either of you." He walked out. The door clicked shut. Clara opened her eyes in the dark. A single tear rolled down her cheek. She knew he meant it. He wanted to protect them, but he did not know what he was protecting them from. The real threat was not the fire that destroyed her apartment. The real threat had a key to this very penthouse. The clinking of fine china woke Clara the next morning. Morning sunlight flooded the massive room. For a brief second, she forgot where she was. Then the weight of the previous night crashed down on her. She sat up quickly. The baby was still sleeping safely in the center of the massive bed. Clara exhaled. She swung her legs over the edge of the mattress. She put on the plush white robe Vance had left for her. She walked toward the kitchen. She smelled freshly brewed coffee and buttered toast. But it was not Vance in the kitchen. Eleanor stood by the marble island, Vance's mother. She wore a tailored beige suit. Her silver hair was perfectly styled. She was pouring tea into a porcelain cup. Eleanor looked up. She smiled. It was a perfectly practiced, chilling smile. "Good morning, Clara," Eleanor said. "You finally brought him back to us." Clara felt her blood run cold. Her fingers gripped the fabric of her robe. "Where is Vance?" Clara asked. "He had to go into the office for an emergency meeting," Eleanor replied. She took a sip of her tea. "He called me first thing. He told me the shocking news. Naturally, I rushed right over to help." The gaslighting began before the morning coffee was even poured. "I do not need your help," Clara said. Her voice was steady. Eleanor sighed. She set her cup down. "Now, Clara, let us not repeat the past. You are clearly unwell. You look terrible, running away like a thief in the night, and keeping my grandson a secret? It is tragic, really." Clara turned around and walked straight back to the bedroom. She locked the door. She breathed heavily. The mother-in-law drama was starting exactly where it left off. Eleanor wanted control. Eleanor wanted Clara out of the picture. The baby woke up. He began to cry. Clara went into motion. She needed to make a bottle. She had brought one clean bottle in her bag last night. She walked to the nightstand where she had left it. It was gone. Clara froze. She looked under the bed. She checked her duffel bag. She checked the bathroom counter. The bottle was missing. Panic fluttered in her chest. Had she left it in the kitchen? No. She distinctly remembered putting it right next to the lamp. A gentle knock tapped on the bedroom door. "Clara, dear?" Eleanor called out through the wood. "I found this empty bottle on the kitchen floor. You really must be more careful. Babies put everything in their mouths. You always were so forgetful." Clara closed her eyes. Her hands trembled into fists. One misplaced bottle. That was all it took to make her question her own mind. She unlocked the door and snatched the bottle from Eleanor's hand. "Thank you," Clara said softly. She closed the door again. She sat on the edge of the bed. She stared at the plastic bottle. "I am not crazy," Clara thought. "I know what I saw. I know where I put this." She picked up her phone from the bed. She opened the baby monitor app that Vance had installed on her phone that morning. He had set up a camera over the crib he had delivered. Clara stared at the screen. She locked the phone. She unlocked it. She looked at the feed. She locked it. She unlocked it. She locked it. She had to make sure the screen was real. She had to ground herself in reality. Eleanor was going to play the same games. Moving items. denying conversations, making Clara look like an unfit mother in front of Vance. It was the exact emotional affair of control that drove her away 2 years ago. When Vance returned that evening, he brought a mountain of shopping bags. He looked exhausted but energized. "I hired a nanny," Vance said, setting the bags down. "She starts tomorrow." "No," Clara said immediately. Vance frowned. "Clara, be reasonable. You need the help. My mother said you were struggling this morning. She said you were losing things. The baby needs structure." Clara looked at him. The betrayal stung, but it was a familiar sting. He always believed Eleanor's gentle concerns over Clara's frantic realities. "I do not need a nanny," Clara said, "and I do not need your mother checking on me. She is just trying to support us," Vance replied. He rubbed his temples. "We are starting over, Clara. Let us just try to make this work." Clara did not argue. Arguing with Vance when he was blind was useless. She just nodded slowly. But her inner voice was loud and clear. "Starting over feels impossible, but staying blind is worse. I will not be a victim this time." 3 days passed. The penthouse was a fortress of quiet tension. The rain had stopped, but the heavy gray clouds remained over the city. Clara spent most of her time in the nursery, avoiding the common areas whenever Eleanor visited. It was Tuesday afternoon. The baby was finally asleep. Clara walked softly down the long hallway toward the kitchen. She passed Vance's home office. The door was slightly ajar. Clara stopped. She remembered this room. It was where her marriage had officially ended. She pushed the door open. The room smelled of old leather and expensive paper. She walked over to the massive mahogany desk. She was not looking for anything specific. She was just a ghost wandering through her own past. She opened the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet. It was where Vance kept old tax documents. Instead, she found a thick manila folder. The label read, "Clara, Settlement." Her hands felt cold. She pulled the folder out and opened it. Inside were copies of their divorce decrees, but beneath the legal jargon was a single sheet of personal stationery. It was her own light pink paper, the paper she used to use for thank you notes. Clara read the handwritten letter. "Amade Vance. I am leaving. I do not love you anymore. I cannot pretend in this lifestyle. Wire $2 million to the attached account, and I will sign the papers quietly. Do not come looking for me. Clara." The air left the room. Clara's vision blurred. The handwriting was a flawless forgery of her own cursive. But she had never written this. She had left because Eleanor cornered her in the garden and told her she would make sure Clara was locked in a psychiatric facility if she did not disappear. Clara had run for her life and for the safety of her unborn child. She had not taken a single dime. The door creaked open behind her. Clara spun around. Vance stood in the doorway. He had come home early. He looked at the folder in her hands. His posture instantly stiffened. "You should not be reading that," Vance said. His voice was defensive. Clara held up the pink paper. "I never wrote this." Vance stepped into the room. He closed the door behind him. "Clara, please, let us not do this. You got the money. I got the peace. It is in the past." "I never took a dime from you," Clara stated. She did not yell. She did not cry. The old Clara would have cried. The new Clara simply spoke the truth with absolute certainty. "I left with 2 suitcases and my own savings." Vance stared at her. He looked at the paper, then back at her face. "The money left my account. It went to an offshore trust. The lawyer confirmed it." "Which lawyer?" Clara asked. "Graham," Vance replied. Clara let the paper drop onto the desk. The pieces of the puzzle clicked together with sickening clarity. Eleanor had managed the family accounts for years. Eleanor had arranged the divorce papers. Eleanor had forged the letter. Vance looked at her. His logical mind was short-circuiting. He could see the absolute conviction in her eyes. The dull, aching pain of falling leaves settled over them both. They had not just fallen out of love. They had been expertly dismantled. "I know what you are thinking," Vance said slowly. "You are thinking my mother did this. But that is impossible. She loved you." Clara gave a dry, hollow laugh. "She loved controlling you. I was just in the way." She turned and walked past him. She did not try to convince him. That was the mistake she made 2 years ago. She had learned that fighting his logic with her emotions was a losing battle. Clara walked straight to the master bathroom. She shut the heavy door and locked it. She did not turn on the light. She sat down on the cold marble floor, fully clothed. She pulled her knees to her chest. She listened to the low, steady hum of the ventilation fan above her. The hum filled her ears, blocking out the heavy silence of the penthouse. She sat there for a long time. She had to choose between her dignity and her security. Both felt impossible to lose. Exposing the truth meant tearing this family apart completely, but staying silent meant losing her mind forever. Somewhere along the way, I became invisible in my own marriage. But I am a mother now. I refuse to be invisible anymore. She pulled her phone from her pocket. She opened her messages. She found her best friend's name, Tess. She had not spoken to Tess in 2 years out of shame. Clara typed a single message. "I am back in the city. I need your help." She hit send. The screen went dark. The true battle had just begun. The brass chime of the private elevator echoed through the penthouse. Clara stood in the hallway. She held the baby against her shoulder. The heavy steel doors slid open. Tess stepped out. She wore a damp trench coat and flat leather boots. Her dark hair was pulled back into a messy knot. She looked completely out of place against the imported marble floors. She also looked like the most beautiful sight Clara had ever seen. Vance walked out of his office. He stopped when he saw Tess. His jaw tightened. He knew Tess. He knew she did not like him. "Tess," Vance said. His voice was polite, but guarded. "I did not know you were coming." "I am sure you did not," Tess replied. She did not take off her coat. She walked straight past him. Vance stepped in her path. "Clara needs rest. She has been through a lot. The unexpected pregnancy, the fire at her building. She is fragile right now." Tess stopped. She looked up at the billionaire. She did not flinch. "She is not fragile. She is exhausted. There's a difference. You let them break her once. I will not let you do it again." Vance frowned. "I am protecting her." "You are putting her in the same cage," Tess said. Her voice was low and sharp. "And you are letting the same snake hold the key." Vance opened his mouth to argue, but Tess walked around him. She reached Clara. She dropped her heavy canvas bag on the pristine floor. She wrapped her arms around Clara and the baby. Clara closed her eyes. The familiar smell of lavender detergent and rain washed over her. It was the smell of reality. It was the smell of home. They walked into the nursery. Tess shut the door. She locked it. "Show me," Tess said. Clara handed her the baby. Tess held the small boy. She smiled, but her eyes were sad. Clara pulled out her phone. She opened the photo gallery. She showed Tess the picture of the forged pink letter. "I found it in his desk," Clara said. "Eleanor forged it. She made Vance believe I'd demanded $2 million to leave. She made him believe I sold him out." Tess stared at the screen. Her grip on the phone tightened. That twisted woman. This is worse than standard mother-in-law drama. This is criminal. "He believes her," Clara said. "He always believes her. Their relationship is like an emotional affair. She controls his feelings. She controls his reality. I was always the outsider." "What are you going to do?" Tess asked. "I am not running," Clara stated. The old Clara would have cried. The new Clara simply stated the facts. "I ran last time because I had a baby on the way. I had to protect him. Now, I have to protect myself. Tess stayed for 2 hours. She helped Clara organize her thoughts. She wrote down a timeline of events. They documented every time that Eleanor had moved something, every time she had lied. They were building a case. When Tess finally left, the penthouse felt empty again. The winter frost was setting in. Clara's sadness was gone. It was replaced by a cold, hard focus. Clara walked into the kitchen. The marble counters were spotless. The private chef had cleaned them an hour ago. Clara grabbed a sponge. Anyway, she turned on the hot water. She squirted dish soap onto the sponge. She started scrubbing the island. She scrubbed hard. Her knuckles turned white. She moved the sponge in tight, angry circles. The friction made a wet, squeaking sound. I deserve better than this. I am not crazy. I know what I saw. She kept scrubbing. She scrubbed until her arms ached. She scrubbed until the hot water turned the marble warm. It was a completely irrational action. The counter was already clean, but she needed to feel in control of something physical. She needed to wipe away the invisible dirt Eleanor left behind. At 3:30 in the afternoon, the front door opened. The sharp click of low heels signaled Eleanor's arrival. Clara dropped the sponge into the sink. She dried her hands on a towel. She walked out of the kitchen. She found Eleanor in the living room. Eleanor was arranging fresh white lilies in a crystal vase. "Oh, Clara," Eleanor said lightly. "You are awake. I brought some fresh flowers. The air in here feels so stale." Clara stopped 10 feet away. She did not yell. She did not cross her arms. She stood perfectly straight. "I know about the letter," Clara said. Her voice was ice. Eleanor paused. Her hands hovered over the white petals. She did not turn around immediately. When she finally did, her face was a mask of polite confusion. "Whatever do you mean, dear?" Eleanor asked. "The pink stationery," Clara replied. "The demand for $2 million. The offshore account. I saw the file." Eleanor gave a soft, condescending laugh. "Well, snooping through Vance's private office. That is very troubling behavior, Clara. It just proves what I have been telling him. You are mentally unstable." Clara did not take the bait. She did not defend her sanity. Defending herself gave Eleanor power. "You forged my handwriting," Clara stated. "You moved the money. You wanted me gone, and you bought my exit with his money. You have no proof of anything," Eleanor said. The sweetness was gone from her voice. Her tone was flat and cold. "You are a distressed woman who abandoned her husband. You hid a baby on the way. If you try to tell Vance this absurd story, I will make sure the courts see your medical history. I will take that child." The threat hung in the quiet room. The lilies smelled heavy and sickeningly sweet. "You can try," Clara said, "but I am not the frightened girl you bullied 2 years ago. I am his mother, and I am not running this time." Clara turned her back on the older woman. She walked away. She left Eleanor standing alone with the flowers. The battle lines were drawn. The winter had truly arrived. The penthouse smelled of roasted garlic and expensive red wine. It was Friday evening. Vance had insisted on hosting a small dinner party. He said it would help them feel normal again. He said it was time to introduce their son to his inner circle. Clara knew the truth. Eleanor had organized the dinner. It was a calculated move. 7 guests sat around the massive dining table. They were board members, wealthy investors, and their wives. The women wore silk dresses and diamond earrings. Clara wore a simple black dress. She felt like a shadow in her own home. The baby was asleep in the nursery. The new nanny, hired by Eleanor, was watching him. Clara hated it. The clinking of crystal glasses filled the room. The conversation was loud and fast. Clara sat quietly at the end of the table. She ate very little. She watched Eleanor. Eleanor sat near the center. She was holding court. She leaned over to the wife of a bank executive. She lowered her voice, but not enough to hide the words. "It is just so tragic," Eleanor whispered. "The gaslighting she puts herself through, she loses things. She imagines conversations. We are terrified she might hurt the baby. It is classic postpartum delusion." The bank executive's wife looked at Clara with pitying eyes. Clara's grip on her silver fork tightened. The metal pressed hard into her palm. She heard the whisper clearly. It was deliberate. Eleanor was planting seeds of doubt in Vance's social circle. She was building a narrative. If Clara ever tried to expose the forged letter, these people would testify that Clara was insane. Vance was sitting at the head of the table. He was talking to a board member about stock options. He did not hear his mother's toxic whispers. Clara felt the walls closing in. The mother-in-law drama was escalating into public character assassination. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The air in the dining room felt too thick to breathe. She quietly pushed her chair back. She stood up. No one noticed except Eleanor, who offered a tight, victorious smile. Clara walked out of the dining room. She walked down the long hallway. She did not go to the nursery. She went to the guest bathroom. She went inside and locked the door. She sat down on the edge of the large porcelain bathtub. She rested her head against the cool, tiled wall. She closed her eyes. She sat in the parked car of her mind. She could not face the party. She could not face the whispers. She stayed there for 10 minutes. She listened to the distant sound of laughter from the dining room. It sounded like a television left on in another room. The hardest part is admitting I knew all along. I knew he would never stop her. Clara stood up. She looked at herself in the mirror. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clear. The panic was gone. It was replaced by a deep, quiet resolve. She walked out of the bathroom. She walked straight to the nursery. The nanny was sitting in a chair, reading a magazine. "I will take him," Clara said. The nanny looked up, surprised. "Mr. Vance said I should watch him until the party is over." "I am his mother," Clara said simply. "I will take him." She reached into the crib. She gently lifted the sleeping baby. She rested his warm head against her shoulder. She walked out of the nursery. She did not hide in the bedroom. She carried the baby directly into the dining room. The conversation stopped. 9 pairs of eyes turned to look at her. Vance stopped talking mid-sentence. He looked confused. "Clara," Vance said, "is everything all right?" Clara looked at him. Then she looked at Eleanor. She maintained absolute, perfect dignity. She did not raise her voice. She did not look crazy. She looked like a queen standing in a room full of strangers. "Everything is fine," Clara said clearly. "But it is late. My son and I are going to bed. Thank you all for coming to our home." She did not wait for a response. She turned and walked away. It was a small victory, but it shifted the energy in the room. The guests looked uncomfortable. They had just heard Eleanor whisper about a raving lunatic, but they had just seen a calm, graceful mother protecting her child. Vance looked at his mother. He saw the brief flash of pure anger cross Eleanor's face. For the first time in his life, Vance noticed the crack in his mother's perfect mask. Clara walked into the master bedroom. She locked the door behind her. She laid the baby gently in the center of the large bed. She lay down next to him. She did not cry. She watched his chest rise and fall. The battle was public now, but Clara had won the first round by refusing to play the victim. The deep winter hit on a Tuesday. Vance had to fly to London for an emergency merger. He left at 6 in the morning. He kissed the baby's forehead. He touched Clara's shoulder lightly. He promised to be back in 48 hours. By 3 in the afternoon, the penthouse felt heavy and silent. The nanny had called in sick. Clara was relieved to be alone. At 7 in the evening, The baby refused his bottle. He was fussy. He cried a sharp, thin wail that Clara had never heard before. Clara touched his forehead. He was warm, very warm. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced her chest. She grabbed the digital thermometer from the diaper bag. She pressed it to his small ear. The device beeped. 103 degrees. Clara's breath caught. He was too little for a fever this high. He was lethargic. His eyes were half open, glassy and unfocused. She pulled her phone from her pocket. Her fingers shook. It was 8 in the evening now. The doctor's office was closed. She sat on the edge of the bed in the dark room. The blue light from her phone illuminated her panicked face. She opened a browser. She typed in the symptoms: fever, lethargy, infant. The search results were terrifying. I have to take him to the hospital, Clara thought. Right now. She moved with frantic speed. She grabbed the heavy car seat. She stuffed diapers, wipes, and a blanket into a bag. She wrapped the burning hot baby in a thick coat. She strapped him into the car seat. She grabbed her phone and her keys. She rushed out of the bedroom. She ran down the long hallway toward the private elevator. She pressed the brass call button. The panel lit up. It asked for the 4-digit security code. Clara quickly typed the numbers. 1, 9, 8, 4, Vance's birth year. It was the code they always used. A red light flashed. A sharp buzz sounded. Access denied. Clara stared at the panel. She typed the numbers again. Slower this time. 1, 9, 8, 4. Red light. Access denied. No, Clara whispered. No, please. She tried her own birth year. She tried the baby's birth date. She tried every combination she knew. Every single attempt ended with a harsh red light. The elevator was locked. The penthouse was on lockdown mode. She ran to the intercom system on the wall. She pressed the button for the lobby security desk. It rang 3 times. Then it clicked. Front desk, a bored voice answered. This is Clara from the penthouse, she said. Her voice shook. The elevator code is not working. My baby is sick. I need you to override the system and send the car up. There was a pause. The static crackled. I am sorry, ma'am, the guard said. Mrs. Eleanor updated the security protocols at noon today. The penthouse is locked from the inside until Mr. Vance returns. Only Mrs. Eleanor has the master override. Clara felt the floor drop away. It was a trap. Eleanor knew Vance was leaving. Eleanor had changed the codes. Eleanor wanted Clara to panic. Eleanor wanted Clara to call her, begging for help, proving she was an incompetent mother. The gaslighting had turned into physical imprisonment. Clara looked at the baby. He gave a weak, pitiful whimper. I am not calling her, Clara thought. I will die before I call her. She grabbed the heavy car seat by the handle. She ran past the elevator to the heavy steel door marked fire exit. She pushed the heavy metal bar. The door groaned and swung open. A cold, concrete stairwell stretched down into the darkness. 34 flights of stairs. Clara did not hesitate. She stepped onto the first concrete step. The door slammed shut behind her, plunging the stairwell into dim, flickering fluorescent light. The car seat was heavy. The plastic handle dug fiercely into her palm. Her legs trembled after the first 5 flights. Her breathing echoed loudly in the empty concrete shaft. It is okay, Clara whispered to the baby. Mama has you. I have you. 10 flights down. Her shoulder burned. She had to stop and switch arms. The air in the stairwell was cold and smelled of dust. 20 flights down. Her knees felt like water. She stumbled on a step. She caught herself against the rough cinder block wall, scraping her knuckles. She did not stop. She could not stop. The physical pain merged with her emotional trauma. Every step was a rejection of the billionaire's cage. Every step was a rejection of Eleanor's control. She was no longer a victim trapped in a glass tower. She was a mother fighting for her child's life, 30 flights down. She was sobbing now, not from sadness, from pure, exhausting physical exertion. The baby was completely silent. That terrified her more than the crying. Finally, she saw the door marked lobby. She pushed through it. She burst into the brightly lit marble lobby. The night guard jumped out of his chair in shock. Clara ignored him. She looked wild. Her hair was a mess. Her clothes were wrinkled. She carried the heavy car seat out the revolving glass doors. The cold winter rain hit her face. It felt like a blessing. She ran to the curb. She waved frantically. A yellow cab slammed on its brakes and splashed water against her legs. Clara opened the door and shoved the car seat inside. She climbed in after it. "Mount Sinai Hospital," Clara gasped. "Please drive fast." The cab sped away into the wet night. Clara leaned over the car seat. She pressed her face against her baby's warm cheek. They had made it out of the sky. They were back on the ground. The fluorescent lights of the emergency room were blindingly white. It smelled of strong bleach and old coffee. Clara sat in a hard plastic chair beside a hospital crib. It was 6 in the morning. The rain had stopped. The baby was sleeping peacefully. An IV line was taped to his tiny hand, delivering fluids and antibiotics. The doctor said it was a severe ear infection that spiked the fever. It was dangerous, but they had caught it in time. The fever had broken an hour ago. Clara let out a deep, shuddering sigh. She slumped forward. She rested her forehead against the cool metal railing of the crib. The mirror moment of absolute exhaustion washed over her. She just listened to the steady beep of the heart monitor. The sound of running footsteps echoed down the hospital corridor. Vance burst into the room. He looked terrible. His expensive suit was wrinkled. His tie was missing. He had flown back on his private jet the moment he got her voicemail. He ran to the crib. He looked at the sleeping baby. He touched the tiny foot. Then he turned to Clara. "Why did you not call the private doctor?" Vance demanded. His voice was loud, fueled by fear and adrenaline. "Why did you take a public cab? Why did you not just use the elevator?" Clara slowly lifted her head. She looked at the man who owned half the city. She felt nothing but cold clarity. "Ask your mother," Clara said. Her voice was flat, emotionless. Vance stopped. "What does my mother have to do with this?" "She changed the elevator codes," Clara stated. "She locked the penthouse while you were in the air. I had to carry your son down 34 flights of concrete stairs in the dark to save his life." Vance stared at her. His logical brain tried to reject the information. "That is impossible. She would not do that. It was probably a system glitch." "Check the security logs," Clara said. She did not argue. She just offered the data. "Ask the night guard. He saw me come out of the fire stairwell." Vance ran a hand through his hair. He looked lost. "Clara, I am sorry. I will fix this. We will get him the best care. I will have a private ambulance take you both back to the penthouse this afternoon." "No," Clara said. Vance blinked. "No? I am never going back to that penthouse," Clara said. She stood up. Her legs were sore from the stairs, but she stood tall. "I am not returning to your cage. I am starting over." "Clara, be reasonable," Vance pleaded. "You have no money. You have nowhere to go. The apartment building burned down. You need me." Clara shook her head. "I thought I needed you. I thought the money made us safe. But the money just gave her the power to destroy me. I am done playing her game." She reached into her bag. She pulled out her phone. The screen was cracked from where she had dropped it in the stairwell. She dialed a number. Vance watched her. "Who are you calling?" "Graham," Clara replied. The phone rang twice. The deep voice of the family lawyer answered. "Graham," Clara said clearly, "I need a favor. You helped Eleanor forge that letter 2 years ago. I know you did. If you do not want me to report you to the ethics board, you are going to find me a safe apartment by noon today, a place Vance does not own. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Graham was a smart man. He knew when he was caught. "Give me 2 hours, Clara," Graham said quietly. He hung up. Clara put the phone back in her bag. She looked at Vance. The shift in power was complete. She was no longer asking for permission. She was dictating the terms. At 10 in the morning, the doctor discharged the baby. Vance tried to carry the car seat. Clara gently pushed his hand away. "I have carried him this far," Clara said. "I can carry him the rest of the way." She walked out of the hospital. A black town car was waiting at the curb. Graham had sent it. Vance followed her out to the sidewalk. He stood in the morning sunlight, watching his family leave him behind. Clara climbed into the back of the car. She secured the car seat. She leaned back against the leather seat. The car pulled away from the curb. Clara looked out the window. The city streets were wet from the night's rain. The windshield wipers pushed the water away in a rhythmic, sweeping motion. She sat in the quiet car, just breathing. The deep vulnerability of the long night was fading. She was terrified. She had $50 in her checking account and a sick infant. But as she watched the city buildings roll by, she felt something she had not felt in 2 years. She felt free. Starting over was terrifying, but finding herself again was worth the price. The long winter was ending. The snow was beginning to melt. The key turned in the cheap metal lock with a harsh click. Clara pushed the thin wooden door open. The apartment smelled like bleach and fresh, cheap white paint. It was small. The living room flowed directly into a tiny kitchen. The linoleum floor was scuffed. The kitchen cabinets were made of chipped particle board. It was nothing like the glass penthouse. It was not a billionaire's fortress. But as Clara stepped across the threshold with a heavy car seat, she took a deep breath. It smelled like absolute freedom. Graham stood in the hallway behind her. The powerful family lawyer looked completely out of place in the dingy corridor. He wore a $5,000 suit. He held a manila folder in his hands. He looked down at his expensive leather shoes. "The rent is paid for 6 months," Graham said quietly. "The lease is under a shell corporation. Eleanor cannot trace it. Vance cannot trace it. It is completely yours, Clara." Claire set the car seat down on the floor. The baby was sleeping soundly, recovering from the fever. She turned to face the older man. "Why are you helping me?" Clara asked. She did not sound grateful. She sounded suspicious. Graham sighed. He rubbed the back of his neck. 2 years ago, Eleanor told me to handle the divorce quiet. She gave me that pink letter. She told me you demanded the money to walk away. I am a lawyer. I process paperwork. I did not ask questions. Clara crossed her arms. "But you knew it was a forgery." "I suspected it," Graham admitted. His voice was heavy with shame. "But Eleanor signs my paychecks. She controls the board. I looked the other way. I justified it by telling myself you were getting a massive payout anyway." "And when you found out the money went to an offshore trust?" Clara asked. Her voice was sharp. "I realized she had set you up," Graham replied. He looked her directly in the eyes. "I saw you at the hospital this morning. I saw you carrying that baby. I have a daughter your age, Clara. I could not look the other way anymore." He held out a set of brass keys. Clara looked at the keys. She reached out and took them. The cold metal pressed against her palm. "Thank you, Graham," Clara said. "Do not thank me," Graham said. "I am just paying off a debt." He turned and walked away down the dim hallway. Clara closed the door. She locked the deadbolt. She locked the chain. She rested her forehead against the cheap wood. "The hardest part is realizing you have to save yourself. I waited 2 years for someone to believe me. Now I only need to believe myself." An hour later, there was a loud knock on the door. Clara jumped. She looked through the peephole. It was Tess, Clara opened the door. Tess walked in carrying 3 massive brown paper grocery bags. She dropped them on the small kitchen counter. The paper rustled loudly in the quiet room. "I bought coffee," Tess announced. "I bought bread, I bought diapers, and I bought a very cheap bottle of wine for later." Clara let out a short, surprised laugh. It was the first time she had laughed in days. The sound felt rusty in her throat. Tess started unpacking the bags. She did not ask about Vance. She did not ask about Eleanor. She just filled the small refrigerator with fresh milk and eggs. Clara watched her. The quiet strength was blooming inside the small apartment. The deep winter was ending. The snow was beginning to melt. "You need to eat," Tess said. She pulled out a box of cheap pancake mix. "I am making breakfast for dinner. Sit down." Clara sat on one of the 2 wooden stools at the counter. Tess mixed the batter in a plastic bowl. She poured it onto a hot skillet. The batter sizzled. The rich, sweet smell of cooking butter filled the kitchen. The baby woke up in his car seat. He made a soft, happy noise. Clara lifted him out. His fever was completely gone. He reached out and grabbed a fistful of Clara's shirt. Tess placed a plate of slightly burnt pancakes in front of Clara. She poured a river of artificial syrup over them. "Eat," Tess commanded. Clara took a bite. It was not the organic, chef-prepared meal from the penthouse. It was heavy and overly sweet. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. Across the city, Vance stood in the center of his massive bedroom. The penthouse was completely silent. The rain had washed the tall windows clean. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the empty bed. Vance walked into the nursery. The crib was empty. The changing table was empty. The small yellow blanket was gone. He walked into the kitchen. The marble counters were spotless. The private chef was preparing dinner. Vance told the chef to go home. He did not want to eat. He did not want to hear another voice. He looked at the kitchen island. He remembered Clara scrubbing it fiercely yesterday. He remembered the desperate look in her eyes. He walked over to the counter. He ran his hand across the cold stone. Vance walked to his home office. He sat down in his leather chair. He stared at the blank computer screen. He pulled out his phone. He opened his text messages. He typed a message to Clara. "Please come back. We can fix this." He stared at the words. He deleted them. He typed again. "I am sorry. Let me help." He deleted that too. Finally, he just typed one word. "Okay." He hit send. He set the phone down on the desk. The silence of the penthouse pressed against his ears. He had built an empire. He had acquired companies. He had amassed a fortune. But sitting in his empty, perfect home, he realized the truth. He was completely alone. The next morning, Clara was organizing the small bathroom cabinet. Someone knocked on the apartment door. She wiped her hands on her jeans. She walked to the door and looked through the hole. It was Vance. He was not wearing a suit. He wore dark jeans and a simple gray sweater. He held a large cardboard box in his hands. Clara unlocked the door. She opened it a few inches. She did not invite him inside immediately. "How did you find me?" Clara asked. "I hired a private investigator," Vance replied quietly. "It took him 6 hours. I am sorry to intrude. I brought some things for the baby." Clara looked at his face. The billionaire confidence was gone. He looked exhausted. He looked like a normal, tired father. Clara opened the door wider and stepped back. Vance walked inside. He looked around the tiny living room. He looked at the scuffed floors and the cheap furniture. He did not judge it. He set the box down on the floor. "I brought the high chair," Vance said, "and his favorite plush bear, and the organic formula you prefer." "Thank you," Clara said. Vance stood, awkwardly, in the middle of the room. He looked at the small kitchen counter. There was a wet rag sitting next to the sink. Clara walked over to the sink. She picked up the rag. She held it out to Vance. "The faucet is leaking," Clara said flatly. "Do you know how to fix it?" Vance looked at the rag. He looked at Clara. He understood what she was doing. She was testing him. She did not want his money. She did not want his security detail. She wanted to know if he could be a partner. Vance took off his expensive watch. He set it on the counter. He took the rag from her hand. "I can figure it out," Vance said. He crouched down under the cheap sink. He used the rag to wipe the wet pipe. He tightened a loose bolt with his bare hands. Clara watched him from the doorway. The dynamic had completely shifted. He was not rescuing her. He was earning his place in her new life. The sleek black car pulled up to the glass corporate tower. Vance stepped out into the crisp morning air. It was Thursday, 3 days since Clara had moved out. Vance walked through the lobby. The security guards nodded at him. The receptionists smiled. He did not smile back. He stepped into his private elevator and pressed the button for the top floor. He walked directly past his executive assistant. He did not ask for coffee. He did not ask for his schedule. "Cancel all my meetings for the next 2 hours," Vance ordered. He walked into his massive corner office. He shut the heavy oak door. He locked it. He walked to his desk and sat down. He opened his laptop. He typed in his master administrative password. He opened the security server for the penthouse. Vance had spent 3 days thinking about Clara's words. She had told him to check the logs. She had told him to look at the truth. For 2 years, he had trusted his mother's word over his wife's frantic claims. His logical mind had always chosen the calm, composed Eleanor over the emotional, terrified Clara. Today, logic was going to serve justice. Vance clicked on the elevator access logs for Tuesday evening. He scrolled down to 8 o'clock. The screen displayed a list of data codes. A timestamp, 8:12 in the evening. User, master admin. Action. Security protocol override. Status, lockdown initiated. Vance's chest tightened. He checked the IP address of the master admin login. It traced back to Eleanor's tablet. He kept scrolling. Timestamp, 8:14 in the evening. User, Clara Penthouse access. Action, attempted elevator entry. Status denied. Timestamp 8:15 attempted entry denied. Timestamp 8:16 attempted entry denied. There were 17 denied entry attempts, recorded over a span of 4 minutes. Vance stared at the screen. He could almost hear Clara's panicked breathing. He could see her frantically punching the numbers while their son burned with fever. Vance opened a new tab. He accessed the camera footage from the lobby stairwell. He typed in the time. 8:25 in the evening. The black and white video buffered. Then it played. The heavy fire door burst open. Clara stumbled into the lobby frame. Her hair was wild. Her clothes were soaked in sweat. She was carrying the heavy car seat. She looked like she was about to collapse, but she kept moving. She ran out into the rainy night. Vance hit pause. The frozen image of Clara's desperate face filled his screen. The reality hit him with the force of a freight train. The mother-in-law drama was not just drama. It was systematic, calculated abuse. Eleanor had engineered a trap. She had willingly put her own infant grandson in danger just to prove a point. She had forged the pink letter. She had stolen Clara's sanity. Vance closed the laptop. The quiet hum of the computer faded. The room was perfectly silent. He picked up his desk phone. He pressed a single button. "Tell my mother to come to my office," Vance said to his assistant. "Right now. Do not let her refuse." 40 minutes later, the office door swung open. Eleanor walked in. She wore a flawless navy blue suit. Her pearls gleamed in the sunlight. She looked slightly annoyed by the sudden summons. "Vance, darling," Eleanor said, taking a seat in a leather chair. "I was in the middle of a charity committee meeting. What is so urgent?" Vance did not stand up to greet her. He sat perfectly still behind his desk. He looked at the woman who had raised him. He realized he did not know her at all. "Where were you on Tuesday night?" Vance asked. His voice was cold and flat. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Tuesday? I was at my townhome. Reading. Why?" "At 8:12 in the evening," Vance said precisely. "You logged into the penthouse security system from your tablet. You initiated a full lockdown. You disabled the private elevator." Eleanor's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she quickly recovered. She offered a dismissive wave of her manicured hand. "Oh, that," Eleanor said smoothly. "The system must have glitched. I remember tapping the screen by accident. I am terrible with that application." Vance did not blink. He did not show any emotion. He used the exact icy tone Clara had used in the kitchen. "The system requires a secondary confirmation password for a lockdown," Vance stated. "It was not an accident. Clara was trapped. The baby had a fever of 103 degrees. She had to carry him down 34 flights of stairs." Eleanor sighed dramatically. She leaned forward. "Vance, you cannot trust her. She is hysterical. She probably made the baby sick herself for attention. You need to see the truth. She is unstable." The gaslighting tactic was happening right in front of him. He saw it clearly for the first time. "I do see the truth," Vance said softly. "I see it very clearly." He opened his top drawer. He pulled out a stack of legal documents. He tossed them onto the glass desk. They landed with a heavy thud. "What is this?" Eleanor asked. Her voice lost its sweetness. "These are severance papers," Vance said. "Effective immediately, you are removed from the board of directors. Your access to the corporate accounts is revoked. The master security keys to my properties have been deleted." Eleanor stared at the papers. The blood drained from her face. Her elegant composure began to shatter. "You cannot do this," Eleanor snapped. Her voice was shrill now. "I am your mother. I built the social foundation of this company. I protected you from gold diggers like her. You forged a letter to destroy my marriage," Vance said. The volume of his voice never raised. "You paid off an offshore account with my money to frame my wife. You locked my sick child in a tower. You are completely toxic." Eleanor stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. "She brainwashed you. She is a manipulative little girl. You will regret this, Vance. You will be a laughingstock when people find out she left you twice." "No one is laughing," Vance replied. He pressed the intercom button. "Security, please escort Eleanor out of the building. Her building passes are no longer valid." Eleanor's eyes widened in pure shock. "You are throwing me out with security? Like a common criminal?" "You are lucky I am not pressing charges for the forgery," Vance said coldly. "Do not ever contact Clara again. Do not ever come near my son." The door opened. 2 large security guards stepped into the office. Eleanor looked at them. She looked back at Vance. She realized she had lost. The total control she had wielded for decades was gone in a matter of minutes. She picked up her expensive handbag. She lifted her chin, trying to maintain her dignity, but her hands were shaking violently. She walked out of the office without another word. The door clicked shut. Vance sat alone in his office. He let out a long, slow breath. The poison was finally drained from his life. He looked out the window at the sprawling city below. He had won the truth victory, but the real work was just beginning. 4 weeks later, the deep chill of the winter had fully passed. The city trees were dotted with the very first tiny green buds of spring. Clara stood in the small kitchen of her apartment. She poured hot water into a ceramic mug. The smell of cheap instant coffee drifted upward. She took a single sip. It was bitter. She set the mug down on the scratched counter and left it there to go cold. She walked into the living room. The apartment was clean and bright. Tess had helped her hang cheap colorful curtains. The baby was sitting on a soft play mat on the floor, happily shaking a plastic rattle. Clara sat on the floor next to him. She smoothed his dark hair. The tension that had lived in her shoulders for 2 years was gone. She slept through the night. She no longer checked her phone camera 10 times a day. Someone knocked softly on the front door. 3 steady taps. Clara stood up. She smoothed her t-shirt. She unlocked the door and pulled it open. Vance stood in the hallway. He looked different. The harsh, arrogant billionaire edge was completely gone. He wore a faded denim jacket and casual boots. He held 2 large paper cups of coffee from the corner bakery. "Good morning," Vance said. He held out one of the cups. "I brought the good coffee today." "Good morning," Clara replied. She took the warm cup. She stepped back and let him inside. This had become their new routine. Every Saturday morning, Vance came to the small apartment. He never brought expensive gifts anymore. He never brought security guards. He just brought coffee and his time. Vance sat down on the scuffed linoleum floor next to the playmat. He did not care about his clothes getting dusty. He picked up a blue plastic block and handed it to the baby. The baby babbled and grabbed his father's finger. Clara watched them from the couch. She blew gently on her hot coffee. "The board approved the final restructuring yesterday," Vance said quietly, not looking up from the baby. "My mother officially has 0 shares. She moved to her estate in Florida. She will not be coming back to the city." Clara nodded slowly. "How do you feel about that?" "I feel lighter," Vance admitted. He looked up at Clara. His dark eyes were honest. "I spent my whole life trusting her logic. I thought emotion was a weakness. I was wrong. Ignoring the truth to keep the peace is the real weakness." Clara took a sip of her coffee. The warmth spread through her chest. "I finally understand," Clara thought. The prison door had been unlocked the whole time. I had been my own jailer because I believed I was not strong enough to leave. But I was. "It is a nice day," Vance said. He looked toward the window. The sunlight was pouring through the cheap curtains. "It is actually warm outside. Do you want to take him to the park?" Clara looked at the man she used to fear, the man she used to hide from. She saw the effort he was making. He was dismantling his entire life just to sit on the floor of a cheap apartment with her. "Yes," Clara said softly. "The park sounds nice." 10 minutes later, they were walking down the busy city sidewalk. Clara pushed the simple canvas stroller. Vance walked beside her. They did not look like a billionaire and his runaway wife. They just looked like parents. They reached the community park. The grass was turning bright green. Children were running around the playground. Dogs were chasing tennis balls. They found an empty wooden bench under a large oak tree. Clara locked the stroller brakes. The baby was already falling asleep, lulled by the rhythm of the walk. Vance sat down on the bench. Clara sat down next to him. There was a comfortable space between them. No pressure, no demands. "We lost 2 years," Vance said softly. He watched a squirrel dart across the grass. "I missed his birth. I missed everything. I cannot stop thinking about that." Clara looked at the sleeping baby. She felt a deep, quiet joy settling in her heart. It was not the jubilation of a fairy tale ending. It was the grounded, solid gratitude of survival. "No," Clara answered. Her voice was steady and peaceful. "We survived 2 years. We learned the truth. We broke the cycle. Now we just start over." Vance turned to look at her. He saw the quiet strength radiating from her. She was not the fragile girl he married. She was a woman who had carried her child through the dark and out into the light. "Can I ask you something?" Vance said. His voice was hesitant. "You can ask," Clara replied. "Do you think," Vance started, choosing his words carefully, "do you think there is a chance for me, not as the man who failed you, but as the man sitting here right now?" Clara looked at him, the spring breeze rustled the leaves above them. The air smelled of wet earth and blooming flowers. The title promise was finally fulfilled. The billionaire had found them in his bed. He had claimed the child, but more importantly, he had finally learned how to claim the truth. "I do not know the man sitting here right now," Clara said honestly. A small, genuine smile touched the corners of her mouth. "But I am willing to meet him." Vance smiled back. The tension finally left his jaw. He leaned back against the wooden bench. "Hi," Vance said softly. "I am Vance." Clara let out a real full laugh. The sound floated up into the warm spring air. "Hi, Vance. I am Clara, and he is yours." They sat together on the wooden bench as the afternoon sun washed over the park. There was no mansion, there were no silk sheets. There was only the truth, the quiet park, and the open future stretching out before them.
The story of Clara and Vance is much more than a dramatic romance. It is a profound exploration of emotional survival, the devastating effects of gaslighting, and the incredible resilience of the human spirit. Throughout our lives, many of us have encountered situations where our reality was quietly questioned, where toxic family dynamics, often disguised as motherly concern or polite guidance, slowly chipped away at our confidence. Eleanor represents a very real type of emotional manipulation. It is the kind of abuse that operates in the shadows, using our deepest vulnerabilities against us while maintaining a perfect public smile. For a long time, Clara believed she was the problem. She allowed herself to become invisible just to keep the peace. But as we see in this story, peace built on a foundation of lies and control is nothing but a beautiful cage. This narrative serves as a powerful reminder that walking away from a toxic environment is never a sign of weakness. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. It takes immense, undeniable courage to pack your bags and step into the unknown. Clara's desperate journey down 34 flights of concrete stairs in the dark is a striking metaphor for the exhausting, solitary process of breaking free from abuse. You carry the weight of the world, your legs tremble, but you keep moving forward because the alternative is losing yourself entirely. Furthermore, Vance's late awakening teaches us a difficult but necessary truth about loyalty and love. Logic, wealth, and power cannot protect a family if you choose to remain blind to the emotional reality of those closest to you. For years, Vance chose the comfortable, familiar lie of his mother's perfection over his wife's difficult truth. It was only when he chose to look at the undeniable facts of his mother's cruelty that he finally became the man and the father his family actually needed. Starting over is terrifying. Realizing that you must rebuild your life from scratch, relying only on yourself, is a daunting task at any stage of life. Yet, as Clara discovered in that small, humble apartment, true freedom is worth far more than any luxury penthouse. It is never too late to reclaim your voice, demand the truth, and absolutely refuse to be a victim in your own life story. We hope Clara's journey inspires you to trust your instincts, protect your peace, and always remember that your reality is valid. This content was meticulously researched, crafted, and manually edited by our team to bring you meaningful stories and valuable life lessons.